Not many women have achieved the pinnacle of success as this Dame of St. Andrew, and very few can stand in her shadow. Join us for this special series of programs called We Bajans as we explore the life and times of Dame Billie Antoinette Miller, her memories, her story, in her own words. Billie Antoinette Miller was born to Frederick and Mildred Miller on January 8, 1944. Her father was a parliamentarian of distinction and served in the House of Assembly from 1948 until 1966, and her mother was a nurse. She received her early education at Bel Air Junior School and Queen's College. It was a time of much joy and wonderment, and the young Billie absorbed every facet of life. She recalled those early days.
Favorite memories? A lot that most Barbadian children had. Vacation time was always memorable, and my parents were going around about the pasture like everybody else, and whatever fruit was stirring, you would have to ask though in those days. It was Mr. Thorpe who had a terrible dog, and but wonderful dumps trees. And there was Carlton pasture where there are a lot of cow patties and really big fat dumps trees, and there were some guava trees. There was Miss Dean in Ashton Village. She had wonderful gooseberries. But once you asked, it was okay. You have to say, and everybody was very polite then, everybody had to be called Mr. or Mrs. Miss Dean, could we have some gooseberries? Promise not to shake the tree, but the ones on the ground, could we take those? And then you would get some old pot and boil it up with sugar and water, and those were the things you did. The beach at Brighton was close by. We moved to Brighton the end of the first year of my life. The first year of my life, I lived with my parents on Baxter's Road. So again, connections. My father's family were city people. They were Reed Street people. And that's where he spent his whole life growing up. Where the Cermat Laundry is on Baxter's Road, he had a workshop downstairs repairing batteries. That's where he built the boat. That's where he and Gordon Butcher built the airplane, which they flew. Well, they reckon if the Wright brothers could do it, they could do it too. They were great friends. And the sea was nearby once we got to Brighton, but my mother never let us go on bank holidays. We were told what every Barbadian child is told, it has no back door, and there were always accidents of some kind on bank holidays. Too many people on the beach, cricket ball hit somebody in the head, and that sort of thing. So the one day when we would like to have been down there with everybody else, we weren't allowed, but we found other things to do.
If any young mind is to blossom, then it must be given fertile ground to do so, and this is precisely the environment in which a young Billie was immersed.
But the memories I think that stand out with me the most had to do with, when I look back on it now and reflect, the things, my parents, they just let their children literally do as they pleased, although we were very obedient. There was one rule of the house: you had to get home before dark. No excuses were allowed. There would be spankings, and then explanations would come after that. So, for instance, the Miller children sometimes would be going to a matinee, and especially would try to go to a double because they thought you got more for your money. And when we thought it's dark inside, you're either at the Empire or the Plaza or wherever, and as the eldest, when I thought that it might be getting dark, my eldest brother would be posted, go out and look at the door and find out what the time is. Do you think we should leave? And many times before the movie was over, we had to be trooping out because we had to get home before dark no matter what. You had to get in that 24 bus, either going to Wamalodge or Pays Bay, and be home.
Dame Billie had these special memories of her early childhood.
The other thing that was important had to do with when I was little, like 6 and 7 and 8. One of my godmothers was still a nurse at the General Hospital. In those days, life was tough. They worked 12-hour shifts. One day off a month, one early morning and one late evening. I can remember it. But the thing was the day off. My mother and my godmother would go shopping in town, and I would be holding two hands in between them. And they would go to the Ideal store, Fogarty. Ideal is what is now called Cape Shepherd. It was a big wooden store then, and it was called the Ideal, and there was a wonderful clock on top, and people met under the clock at the Ideal. And that was my favorite thing. All dressed up. The Ideal had everything in it. There was Mr. Morris Cave in his suit. Mommy and Auntie would be looking at what we call material that was on a boat. And there were little bentwood chairs, and they'd be sitting down, you know, and she'd be saying, Mildred, what do you think about that? Is this color, you would say this is a corn color, or is this, you know? And I would be under the counter and walking about. It was like wonderland to me. And Mr. Cave would come, and he would always, first time I ever heard the phrase, are you being served? Which became it, but, you know, it was just incredible that I remember that in my childhood. But Cave Shepherd was like Aladdin's cave. I mean, everything was sold there. Basins, rally bicycles, of course you looked at them, but you know, you had to pass an exam to get anything in our household. And you would hope that if you got into a secondary school, and in those days each secondary school had its own entrance exam, that you might get a bicycle. The SPCK bookshop was upstairs, where you bought hymn books and Bibles and so on. They had a soda fountain. I mean, it was fantastic. And that is a memory that stays with me forever.
For her, childhood had many beautiful and enchanting moments.
Other growing up memory was when we were old enough, my brothers and I was like 8 and 9. Yeah, earlier than 9, because I went into Queen's College at 9. In those days, you sat at 9. And when I was like 7 and 8, every Saturday morning, you got the bus and you went to town. My father's ice factory at Tudor Street, up Sobers Lane to the library. The library was another wonderland. The lady in charge of the children's library was, she was wonderful. She knew that I just loved eating, writing books, and the thing was to get there exactly at 9 o'clock when she opened the door, rush inside hoping there'd be a new one. And if it was a new one, she would give me a little wink, and I would be very happy indeed. But you know, by 4 o'clock that evening I would have read it out, and then have to read it again till the next Saturday. And in those days you couldn't get out a library book unless you brought your own covers, made of brown shot paper. And if you didn't have the covers, you could not take a book out. This was where I think, again looking back, the love affair with the city of Bridgetown began. Because once you got your library book, went back to the ice factory, put it down in its cover, and then you could walk about wherever you liked as long as you got back there at midday to go home. And I would walk up Tudor Street, all the overhanging galleries, Milk Market, fantastic. These ladies with big trays, really big trays, and they had all kinds of grung provisions there, and other things like raw nuts, and you know, it was busy, and people were talking, and these women were talking to each other about all kinds of things, and it was like being at a fair. Then I would go down Subtle Street, and you would begin to hear the different accents there. That is why to this day I can distinguish between a Dominican, St. Lucian accent, because these people would be selling coals, which people in Barbados would use because we were still having coal pots then. And brooms made from palm leaves, all sorts of things. Oh, it was just, I could spend hours, get lost in that.
Barbados in the early days meant persons only got news via rediffusion. Life was simple and carefree, and emphasis was placed on family values and giving to one's fellow man. She recalled how Barbados was in those times.
Then you go up. There were tin merchants, I remember, on Milk Market. So at Christmas time, Easter time, that's where you would go, and you would buy your cake tins and things like that. They weren't imported much. There were tinsmiths who made them right here in Barbados. But then, of course, after the hardware stores, like the Blanchett shop in Swan Street and so on, started to bring in ready-made things. Then the tinsmiths unhappily disappeared. But to watch them work was, again, fascinating. And you walk up Broad Street, all the shops, Fogarty's where they sold men's hats. But to be inside Harrison's or Cave Shepherd was an experience. Bills were written out in triplicate. And the clerk, what we used to call the clerkess, would then sing out, "Cash!" And you would hear from somewhere else in the store, "Boy, come in." This boy is a big grown-up man in 2021, but you had to wear short pants. And he was the cash boy. He would take it then to a lady, like in an enclosed, like a cage really, and she would do things with it. He had to take it then to the floor walker, who always wore a tie, and he was just walking up and down. And depending on the time of day, like if you were there in the afternoon, when the wooden floors got dusty, man would come with a bucket and sprinkle water to keep the dust down. Because in those days you would buy, if you were a Girl Guide like I was, and my brothers were scouts, you would buy all of your badges and things, that sort of stuff. The material to make your school uniforms would be bought there, and they had to be made up, so many inches when you knelt down and so on. Everything had to be just right.
And that's just a glimpse into the life of one of Barbados's most acclaimed daughters, Dame Billie Antoinette Miller. She was also this country's first female deputy prime minister and has made a significant contribution in such spheres as politics, law, international affairs, and women's rights issues, just to name a few. She certainly has written her name on history's page.